I was in the newsroom of the campus radio station of the University of Nebraska on January 28th, 1986, when there was a bulletin from the Associated Press that said, there appears to be a major malfunction aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger. And I always thought that was one of the greatest understatements of all time until now when I said 2020 has been one of the most unusual years we've ever seen. That might be maybe one of the bigger understatements. We're living in the midst of a pandemic, in the midst of a presidential campaign that seems unprecedented. There have been more hurricanes than the National Weather Service had names. Wildfires have burned hundreds of thousands of acres in the western United States. There's so much going on that the murder hornets of last spring are just a blip on the radar. You do all remember murder hornets from back in like March, right? In the midst of all this going on, there was something else that happened in America. The United States Mints, like so many workplaces, sent people home as the coronavirus pandemic began to try to keep people healthy. Some bank branches shut down or reduced work because they were trying to keep people healthy. We didn't shop because we stayed at home. What happened then is there was suddenly a shortage of coins in America. Retailers, when they went to get coins to make change, suddenly they couldn't get the quarters, the dimes, the nickels, the pennies they needed to do business. At one point, there were banks and businesses willing to pay more than face value. They were offering premiums or gifts if you were willing to empty out that piggy bank or that change jar and bring in your coins and get them back into circulation. Now, we have all sorts of ways to pay for things in 21st century America. We can write checks, we can use debit cards, credit cards, we can pay for things electronically. When I paid my income tax bill this year, my accountant had my bank account information, and he entered it in his computer, and a couple of days later, the Department of Revenue magically had managed to take money out of my checking account. Now, in the first century, though, there really was nothing else other than coins. That was the only way you paid for anything. In the first century Palestine, those coins would have been Roman coins, that money from the occupying Roman government. And those coins would have reflected in the Roman concept that Roman emperors were at least godlikes, if not gods themselves. Stamped on the coins when Jesus was ministering would have been this inscription: Tiberius Caesar, son of the divine Augustus, high priest. This is a problem for the people of Israel. The law they were called to live by, the law of Moses, right there in those 10 commandments that we know well, it's pretty clear that you shouldn't have any other gods other than God. But right there on the money then is this other God. Just to put this passage in context, to remember where we are in the life and ministry of Jesus, this is in that last week, those last few days before he's arrested and crucified. He's arrived in Jerusalem, making that entrance that we remember on Palm Sunday, and then things begin to get more and more confrontational, more and more hostile. He's delivering a message, frankly, people don't want to hear. And if we're honest with ourselves, we should understand why. Human nature doesn't change much over time. Like today in the 21st century in organizations, whether businesses or civic groups or some churches, I'm sure not here, other churches. In the 21st century or the first century, the force of Thwadi is strong. Thwadi, it's an acronym, Thwadi. That's how we've always done it. I see a couple nods. first century church was not unlike any other church. That's how we've always done it. You see, we make the Pharisees out to be really bad people because they're the antagonists in this story. They're the ones working against Jesus. They are challenging him, and at some point they plot to have him killed, so I'm not sure how, there's ethical problems there, of course. But all in all, Pharisees aren't bad people. They're the kind of people who go to work every day. They're the kind of people who practice their faith regularly. They would have showed up for worship every week. They would have served in the temple as they were asked to do. They would have looked for ways to apply their faith in their daily lives. Sounding like some people we know, isn't it? And they had done what they'd done for generations. So in a lot of ways it makes sense. This rabbi from Galilee shows up and tells them everything that they're doing is wrong. They need to completely overturn their world, overturn the way they're thinking, just like he had overturned the many changers' temples in the temple. If somebody comes in and tells you everything you're doing is wrong, you're going to be resistant. So they have a couple choices. They can listen to him and change, or they can keep doing it the way they've always done it. And rather than listen to Jesus and want to change, they decide they want to make him go away. They're looking for a way to discredit Jesus, to silence him. They had questioned his authority, and that hadn't gone well. So now they have teamed up with some unlikely partners. This text says the Pharisees are now working with Herodians. That's a political group, not necessarily a religious group. They are a group, as the name implies, that are loyal to Herod. They support the Roman government that's occupying. If you're looking for an analogy, I think the closest thing I can imagine for us would have been those in the American colonies loyal to Britain during the Revolution. They support that occupying government. Now the Pharisees, while not very openly opposing occupation, they at least privately would have been opposed to it. They weren't really happy having the Romans conquer them. So these are, once again, politics makes strange bedfellows. These two groups don't have a lot in common other than neither one of them like Jesus. The Pharisees don't for religious reasons. The Herodians are concerned simply they don't want rebellion in Jerusalem during Passover. The city grows in size to about 10 times what it usually is, and they want peace and quiet. They don't want somebody coming in and starting something that could lead to an uprising. So they join forces. They work together. They think they have laid a trap for Jesus. And they think it's a pretty good trap because they have a question for which there is no right answer. That question about whether it is right to pay taxes. Because you see, if he says they shouldn't pay taxes, the Herodians can accuse him of sedition, of rebelling against the Roman government. And they know what to do with people who are trying to start a political uprising. If he says they should pay taxes, then the Pharisees know what to do. They can go out and tell people that he has no authority because he's not practicing religion the way he should, that he is putting this other God, the emperor, before God. Jesus doesn't fall into their trap. And as we look at how this exchange goes, I want you to keep something in mind. When the Gospels were first written down, they were written on papyrus. And it's not like today's paper, not only in structure, but in its availability. Papyrus was very expensive. It was very scarce. You used as little of it as possible to the point that when these were originally written, they didn't capitalize the beginnings of sentences and they didn't use punctuation to save space. So I think there has to be a lot more going on than what the words of this text say. So just imagine with me how this all really plays out. These groups come together. Jesus, and I'm sure his disciples with him, And then this other group of Pharisees and Herodians. And the text tells us this isn't an honest conversation. This is confrontational. There's some gamesmanship. They are trying to trap and trick Jesus, and Jesus knows it. So they gather and they ask him that question of, is it right to pay taxes? And then he asks them, well, does anybody have a coin? I can tell you what happens next. All those Pharisees and Herodians standing there in the temple looking at him, they do exactly what happens in every church meeting when the pastor asks somebody to pray. They all immediately looked at their feet. They didn't want to make eye contact with Jesus. Finally, somebody shuffles around, digs around, and pocket or purse somewhere that comes up with a coin. Why didn't they want to come up with a coin? But somebody finally did. Jesus has already trapped them right there, because to have an image of another god in the temple is illegal. So when they pulled that coin out to produce for Jesus, they're already the ones in violation of their own law. But I'm sure they pull it out and it probably gets passed up to Jesus. I imagine he flips it over in his hand a couple times. He looks at it. We know Jesus is a master storyteller and preacher. He's going to let that drama build for a couple moments. He's going to let some tension build. Think about his answer. They're going to wonder what's taking so long. This is a yes or no question. And then he's going to ask them his question. Whose image is on the coin? I don't know about you. I had a boss once that would start asking questions. About 3 questions in, you'd realize he was taking you down a path and it was a trap. And you realized where you were going, and at that point there was nothing you could do but answer the questions and take what was coming. And I imagine those who just got asked that question of whose image was on this coin felt like I did when I got trapped. They knew that the game was up. Whose image is it? The emperor's. Then he gives them that sentence. Give to the emperor what belongs to the emperor, and give to God what belongs to God. That is a mic drop line if you have ever heard one. You can't drop mics in the first century. I imagine he probably flips the coin back to whoever gave it to him. Probably walks off, or they walk off. But it's just done right there. As an aside, let me be very clear about something. Anybody who has ever dropped a microphone has not paid for one, and I do not condone dropping mics. Let's never do that. I imagine it ending like President Bartlett ended conversations in the Oval Office on the West Wing, if you ever watched it. When he ended the conversation with the 2 words, "What's next?" And his staff knew that when he was wrapping something, they said, "What's next?" that he was done and he was moving on. I imagine Jesus tossed that coin back to somebody and said, "What's next?" and headed off, because he was done with that conversation. He wasn't messing around anymore. Give to the emperor what belongs to the emperor, but give to God what belongs to God. It's a sentence out of Scripture we know well. We've heard it over and over again. You may mutter it under your breath when you do your income taxes. I don't know. But what does it really mean? Do any of us really know? It is kind of cryptic in some ways. I don't know what it really means. There's something I really believe it doesn't mean. And a lot of scholars believe this. Some people point to that as supporting the modern separation of church and state. There's a separation between what belongs to the government and what belongs to God. A lot of scholars discredit that simply for the idea of this. The idea of the modern separation of church and state is modern. It came 15, 16, 1700 years after Jesus. So that probably wasn't what he had in mind. But what does it mean? Could it be that Jesus is inviting us not to place all those earthly things we buy with those coins ahead of our relationship with God? Emperors sure liked to do that. They liked their earthly things and the land they could conquer. And it's easy for us to do, and especially nowadays, there's lots of people getting paid lots of money to convince us to buy lots of stuff. Most of us have more stuff than we know what to do with. In fact, self-storage. Leasing out space for people to put their stuff that doesn't fit in their garage or their house. You have to have extra space somewhere else to go put your extra stuff. That's now a $39 billion a year business in the United States. That's how much stuff we have. The author, David Foster Wallace, wrote, "Everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship." Everybody worships. The question then becomes, do we worship God? Do we worship money, power, status, celebrity? Is Jesus telling us that we're to worship God and not money or the things that money buys? I don't know if that's what that sentence means. Maybe. Jesus is saying there are times we owe something to the emperors of the world. We are citizens of a nation. And we have to do what responsible citizens of a nation do. And sometimes that means we pay our taxes, But we owe our whole selves to God. Remember that coin. That's the coin. You know, emperors could stamp their image on coins. So go ahead and pay your taxes to the government. God doesn't mint coins, though. But God's image is lots of places. What's God made in God's image? Us. We're made in God's image. We see God's image in all of creation. God doesn't need mint coins. Actually, probably makes me and emperor look pretty small. You didn't put your face on a coin versus all of creation. But if all of creation is God's, and we don't own any of it, how does that affect our relationship with the world and all of creation? Does that change the decisions we make as we think about how we care for the environment, how we care for the natural world around us, how we care for the people we meet every day? Does that make buying an electric car an act of worship? I don't know. I do know that I think in some ways it's a very different viewpoint that a lot of people have held for maybe the last, let's say, a couple hundred years, where we've looked at this earth as being filled with natural resources we could extract and exploit however we saw fit, and particularly to make good business sense. So is this a call to live our lives remembering we are stewards of God's creation while we are here? You know, I don't know what the answer is in that sentence. And this isn't just a rhetorical technique. I'm not sure I really know. I'm sure there is one right answer to what that particular sentence in Scripture means. I do know I don't want to give up my 21st century lifestyle. I don't want to sell all my possessions and go try to live off the grid and live off the land. Even though as a farm kid, I think I probably failed pretty bad, failed at that. I don't think that's what we're called to do. I think God gave us the gifts of intelligence and science and innovation and technology, and it's all part of this world we now live in. But I think we can't live in it and function in it without thinking about who we're called to be as God's people. What I think Jesus might be saying to us today, anyway, is it's an invitation to remember that we all make economic decisions. And as we make those economic decisions, we have to remember that all of creation belongs to God. And I say that Jesus invites us. I think Jesus invites us. The way my parents used to ask me to do something, they asked merely because they were being polite and didn't want to just tell me to do something. I'm not sure Jesus is inviting us. I think he's demanding us to. How we spend our money, how we spend our time, how we plan for retirement, how we plan for what we're going to leave for the next generation. It's all complicated, and it's getting more and more complicated. And it gets more complicated as we think about that and reflect on it as children of God. I believe that maybe it's one of the most complicated decisions we have to make, how we, as people of faith, use the resources we have, our money, our time, our gifts, what we give to God, and how we use what we have. Yet, money is a topic no one wants to talk about. Most churches, if they talk about money, they talk about it once a year, and that's the Sunday that the church asks its membership to decide to commit how much money they're going to give over the course of the next year. Jesus never shied away from talking about money as he traveled and preached and taught. I'm not sure we should either. You know, we're 2,000 years removed from Jesus, and our world has gotten more and more complex. We've gone from simple coinage to electronic payments and debit cards, and now we're into cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Our lives are more complicated. They're also more interconnected than ever before. Goods and services and currencies move not just through a community, they move through the world, unlike they ever have before. So I think it makes those conversations about how we live out our lives as God's people, how we earn, how we spend, how we invest our time and money, I think they're becoming more important, not less. So I think we should talk about it more, not less. And I think we should talk about it more often than simply talk about what church is. So now, this is where those green index cards finally come in, you've been wondering about all morning. And I wish I could tell you there was some really magical symbolism in the fact that it's green and it's the color of money. I'm going to be completely honest. I had white 3x5 index cards, and they're still laying on my desk at home, and the green 4x6 ones were the first ones I found in the closet this morning, so there's no magic there. But here's what I'd like you to do. This is my invitation to you. Now, I'm not like my parents asking you to do this and really telling you this is truly an invitation. If there's a question you've always wondered about, something you think about or puzzle with or wrestle with about faith and money, about living out our faith in this modern economy, write it down. Place it in the offering when you come forward to give your offerings later. Now, I also say I'm not giving you much time to think about this. If over the course of the next few days you reflected on it and think, oh, wow, this is what I really should have asked bring it back next Sunday, drop it off in the office, send me an email. I don't have all the answers. I'm not trained to know all the questions. I'd like to know what you're wondering about. I'm going to take whatever questions I get from you, take the questions I get from Big Springs, and at some point, a few weeks down the road, we'll talk some more about it. We'll see what questions there are. If there's a lot, maybe more than one we can talk about. I know I don't have all the answers. I do know, however, more and more we live in a world that is filled with stuff that we seem to buy and throw away faster and faster and faster, and I wonder how we are called to be responsible citizens of the world. I had a really interesting shopping experience on Labor Day. Taking a couple days off, get out of town, and leaving St. Louis on Monday morning, a friend and I were coming back, decided we want to try to find a couple thrift stores on the way out of St. Louis just because we're bargain hunters. Did, sort of that 21st century find your way around shopping thing, hit Google and, hit the smartphone apps. I found the Goodwill outlet store of St. Louis wasn't far off the route from St. Louis back to Topeka. Punched it in the phone and away we went. I had not been to a Goodwill outlet store before. They're in, I know there's one in Kansas City too. It is the last stop for merchandise. Goodwill has received donations. It is stuff that has been out to their stores where they could sell and it's come back. It's stuff that they've received and decided it wasn't worth sending out to the store. If it doesn't sell here, it's going to get recycled, discarded, whatever. There is no thought in how it's merchandise. There are literally bins on wheels filled with stuff. Clothing separated, books are separated, by and large, something like that. The rest of it, you're just digging through stuff. And with a few exceptions, you buy it by the pound. You literally roll your shopping cart on a scale when you're done shopping. But to see the stuff that people have cast off, VHS videotapes from movies from the 90s that are still in the wrapper that nobody even opened up, much less watched. I came across probably a 3-inch 3-ring binder completely filled with classical music CDs. It had to be a collection that somebody put a lot of work into gathering. That was there and available for $1.19 a pound. Clothing, bins and bins of clothing, bedding, still in the package from higher-end retailers that you would recognize the names of. Books that had never been touched. And here, if nobody wanted it, it was going to get recycled or discarded or thrown away or sent to landfill, whatever they best could do with it. The part that really struck me home, though, was the Goodwill outlet in St. Louis is about half a mile down the street from IKEA. And on Labor Day morning, given the restricted capacities right now during the pandemic, there were a line of people waiting to get into IKEA on Labor Day morning to get more stuff, some of which was going to end up at that outlet store down the road. And just that consumerism cycle just keeps going and going and going. I don't have answers to what that means, and how we are better stewards of our resources, how we are better consumers. I know I think it's things we should talk about. Because it all affects not only us, it affects all of creation. hearts to care for while we are here. I don't know what Jesus meant that day when he was in that showdown, that confrontation, when he said, give to the emperor what belongs to the emperor, and give to God what belongs to God. It is kind of a cryptic line. But I do believe we do owe God thanks for all that we have. I do think we have to be responsible citizens of our country, our world, and still also remember that we are children of God.